learned judges, judges from the judiciary, senior counsels, my colleagues, friends and well-wishers. It's a very important topic close to my heart personally and close to the hearts of millions of Indians as to what does our constitution say and guarantee about faiths and beliefs. Thank all my juniors who had labored enough and more for doing this work. But as counsels, we have to caveat and carry a very, very sensitive responsibility when we talk about a matter of this nature, which is subject to a review petition. And the review is being started. It commenced hearing, but they could not progress because of COVID. And today, on 10th February, an order was passed saying that review is permissible. And today, Supreme Court appears, from what we understand, a detailed order has been passed, holding that the 9th bench will hear the matter at some point of time. And therefore, when a matter is subject to review, we have always a self-imposed care. I wouldn't say limitation, but a care. It involves the institution, it involves the authors, and it also involves the judgment. Therefore, each one approaches it in one particular style. I have always believed throughout my 31 years of practice that we should always align and integrate with the institution. Contribution is possible only when you work with an institution and not when you try to either retaliate or give your own perspective. Each one, I'm not saying this is right or that is wrong. No comments on that. But we need to always be aligned, is my personal thinking. Therefore, it's a humble request that whenever we deal with the subject, whichever question, any clarification, we should be very careful and cautious in approaching. And because we are all part of the institution, and we should always uphold the pride of our institution. And more importantly, a judgment of this nature, authored by judges with eloquence, erudition, and scholarship. So with this background, let's understand what faiths and beliefs are under the guarantees given to us under the Constitution. Now, what we need to know first is, what is God and what is religion? This is not a discourse on these topics, but Supreme Court, through various decisions, have held what is religion and what is God. And the sum and substance of it is something which one understands to go near the Maker. Sum and substance. What do we mean by going near the Maker? We'll put it this way. 3 questions are asked normally in any religion. Can you decide of your own choice the date of birth, the place of birth, and the parents to whom you should be born? Question 2. Can you decide the date of birth, the time of birth, and who should be around you as an exit point? So the universal answer is, we can neither measure birth, demand birth in a particular way, nor demand exit in a particular way. It's beyond our control. It is a fact which everybody will accept. Therefore, the question is, when you can't decide the starting point, which is birth, and the terminating point, which is death, can you on your own decide everything else in between? That's the simple point. So how does world react to it? World says, look here, I will always be convinced with what I see, what I hear, what is visible to me, what is to my perception. That's one view of thinking, what we call it as pratyaksha pramanam. So what I see, what I read, what I know, that I will believe. I will not believe beyond that, which you are entitled to. But there is one downside. The perception of each individual will vary. For example, let's take a diamond ring. For a man who wants to possess, if he possesses it, it gives him joy. For a man who wants to possess but is unable to possess, he becomes sad. And for a man who is in the path of, say, salvation, this is just yet another stone, and therefore there is indifference. Therefore, you can't be saying whatever I see is right. It may be right to you, but not necessarily right as a truth. Now, the second assumption we all make in our lives is presumption. When there is a smoke, say, in a faraway hill, then we assume there must be a fire underneath it. So this again can go wrong. For example, somebody in the next room smokes, and you find the smoke coming out. As per this presumptuous meaning, there must be a fire under the smoke. So smoke comes via the nostrils. The fire should be in the nostrils, whereas the fire is only in the cigarette. Therefore, presumptions can also go wrong many times. Therefore, they say, you may lead your life based on these two, but there is something beyond this, which teaches you what is life. So it is that which we call it as religion. On the focal point of religion, we call it as God. Now, under the Constitution, you can have different sets of citizens. All are citizens enjoying equal rights. Some may say, I don't care about birth, I don't care about death, I don't believe in it, I've just born, I've just landed into this place. So God doesn't exist to me. So religion may call him as an atheist, but Constitution calls him as equal citizen. So we should respect that point of view. Somebody will say, I want to be very neutral. I know there is something in it, but I don't want to explore it. It may be there, it may not be there. We call them as agnos, but they are citizens of this country with equal rights. Some will say, no, my religion says, my scripture says, my teacher says, and this is the path I need to proceed to progress in life. Then we call them as believers. They are also equal citizens. They are not one shade better or one shade less. So, what does our Constitution guarantee is? It says all the three people are only citizens to the country, and you can coexist together. And each one can profess, practice, and propagate what you feel is right. Subject to two limitations, which is what Supreme Court says. You cannot do anything to hurt yet another practitioner. A believer should not be condemning the atheist as this is irreconcilable, this should be shunned. He can't be doing that. Nor can an atheist do the same to an agnostic or to a believer. There is a confusion as we progress on the terminology of secularism. Secular means all the three, you may be a believer, non-believer, or an agnostic. All the three should respect the other and should respect every other co-religionist who is a practitioner of that religion. This is all the bottom line of secularism. Whereas the modern evolution seeks to go in a direction to say, secularism means you should be irreligious and the other person should be irreligious. So take religion out of you, then you are secular. That's where we are slowly progressing as we see the growth. Unless you are religious or not religious, you can't respect somebody else. So secularism has nothing to do with deciding the guaranteed rights under Article 25. Because they are enshrined rights, they are fundamental rights. Now, this is the basic premise. First, we should understand this basis. So, one can practice, profess, and propagate, but cannot hurt or insult or assault. If that is done, it is not some statutory breach in some criminal law. It is a constitutional breach. You are actually interfering with the right of someone else. Whichever way it goes, the velocity is the same. Recently in Tamil Nadu, I'm just narrating one as an example. Somebody, a saint who had 350 years of history, a glorious history, somebody comments saying that he is a Pichakaran. Whereas religion distinguishes between a Pichai and a Bhikshai. Pichai is a desperate fellow. Pichakaran is desperate. He doesn't have anything. Whereas Bhikshai is, he has everything, but he forgoes everything, takes alms out of humility. And if he gets alms for that day, he will eat for that day. When the king invited this poet to say, please sing in my praise, he said, I will sing only in praise of Rama. I don't want you. So he threw all his luxuries and then went, sought alms. And scriptures say, if you can seek only in 5 houses a day. Suppose 5 people you ask and they don't give you, you have to return back empty. So this is the significant difference about every aspect and practice which we make. So is it heard? So I have always viewed, I may be right or wrong, any constitutional breach by anybody, I think courts have a right to suo motu, call for the matter and take it. If 10 courts decide 20, 50 matters of this nature, the condition in the country can certainly change for the better for the sake of the next generation. So this is the format of Article 25. Now, the point which we need to travel next is who can govern, who can interpret Article 25. That's the point. Now the question is, can the state do it? Can state keep issuing interpretation every day? Each state or the center say, according to us, religion means this. These are all the things which you should do. State cannot do that. State has only one power under 25 to legislate laws provided they are in the nature of a social reform. And whether a religious practice can be brought under a social reform is also one of the questions pending before the 9 judges today, because of the view expressed by Justice Rajagopal Iyengar in Saifuddin's case. So state cannot do it. Now, second, are there any bodies in India like the GST Council, which is a constitutional body? Do you have any constitutional body which can prescribe what each religion should do? There is no such prescription. There is no such body under the Constitution. 3. Therefore, can judiciary interpret what religion is? So when it reached judiciary for interpretation, 7 judges 70 years back have laid down the principle that religion should be left to its practitioners. And if at all there is something that we need to explore or inquire about is, if there is a contest about a particular practice, we'll have to only identify whether it is found in the scriptures as an essential practice. It's not for the court to decide what is essential. That's the biggest difference. Essential practice test means essential practice as found by the religion, either in its text or in its practice or its time immemorial customs, whichever may be. Temple practice, ever so many things. So this is exactly what it seeks to say as essential practice tests. There can be exceptions. For example, 2 people come and contest. What do you say? Then, if both are found to be essential, then court has to accord status to both. If both are in conflict with each other, court may have to then decide which one is as acceptable to the scripture found to be right. There again, court cannot adjudicate on its own that no, after 2 you are come for a dispute. So after 2 we will decide no, that's not possible. They will have to reconcile it with the scripture to say this appears to be closer to the other one. Therefore, essential practice test is the standard test that has been in vogue for 70 years. Except for 1 judgment out of the 4, all the other 3 has actually accepted essential practice tests. There is no now I'm specifically referring to the Sabarimala judgment. Except for 1 judgment, the rest of the 3 judgments have accepted the essential practice tests. Now, can you say Sabarimala is a case which satisfies this essential practice test? I will only give bare facts, not arguments, not contentions, for you to appreciate the bare facts. There are two important premises which we do bear it in mind when we decide this matter. Now, one is the stand taken by everyone, accepted by the court, that this idol, Ayyappa at Sabarimalai, is a Naishtika Brahmachari. Of course, the point which they pursue may be different from what I'm trying to put across, slightly different. But the convergence will be there for certain. I can assure you that. What is good about why I'm narrating this fact is this fact is accepted by all the four judgments. That the idol personifies the vibration and radiation of an Naishtika Brahmachari. Now, all that one has to see is Naishtika Brahmacharyam an essential practice test for religion? Therefore, what is Naishtika Brahmacharya? One who chooses to preserve celibacy throughout one's life becomes Naishtika Brahmacharya. This is all. Now, all right, what are the basis to say it looks nice to read, it's all fine? Is there a textual religious basis for this? See, Sanatana Dharma says there are 8 steps. We see the whole, our life, our existence is broadly put into what is called as the 4 Purusharthas. Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, broadly speaking. So use Dharma as a tool and aggregate wealth to enjoy righteous desires, and that will take you to moksha. So a practitioner of a religion can believe in these 4 Purusharthas, starting from Dharma, ending with moksha. A non-practitioner can say, I will dispense the first, I will dispense the last. To me, Artha and Kama is life. He is also an equal citizen under the Constitution. No less. So, choice is between us. You decide. If you go to a religious text, it will say that you have to follow this. Therefore, the path of moksha, which is important in Sanatana Dharma, tells you it is an 8-fold path. Yama, restraints. Niyama, observances. Asana, postures. Pranayama, breath control. Pratyahara, abstraction. Dharana, steadiness. Dhyana, meditation. And samadhi, equipoise. So it starts with yama, ends with samadhi. This is all there in Patanjali Yoga Shastra. There are verses, there are commentaries. So it's a text approved, forming part of the Dharma, in which yama means restraint. There are 5 basic restraints which a practitioner of religion should follow if he has to go to moksha, to go and reach the creator, which is exactly Supreme Court says. Religion means reaching a discovery or a path or an inquiry or a journey into seeking and joining the maker, says our court. So how do you do it? What are those restraints? See, ahimsa, truth, not to commit theft, not to be greedy, and continence. These are the 5 restraints you need to practice if you want to grow. See, you can believe, I am a non-believer, say this is rubbish. Yeah, you are entitled to. But for The script, you can't say scriptures are rubbish. You can say, I don't believe in it. That right you have got it under the Constitution. But you know, right to say this scripture is a rubbish scripture. That right nobody has. Now, continence is called brahmacharya. And what does, see, we will take a person who is acceptable to all of us. There is hoary literature, volumes and volumes on what is brahmacharya. Swami Vivekananda, in his complete work, has written pages, volumes on this. See, why do they ask you to apply restraint? If suppose you speak truth, just one example. If you speak only truth in life, over a period of time, whatever you speak, the rest of them will listen. They won't be able to contest against you. That's the power you will get by speaking truth. Mahatma Gandhi had it. He had ahimsa and truth always on his hands. So each one generates a power. Brahmacharya also generates enormous power. And Vivekananda says one example. He cites several examples. If somebody can maintain brahmacharya for 12 years at a stretch, then that person will not have loss of memory at all in his life. For an entire life, there will be no loss of memory. And he says, how did he make Chicago Address? 495 words, which impacts us even today after 120 years. 495 words because of brahmacharya. He says that. When I slept the previous day, it appeared like a screen before me what I should speak, and I spoke that. So, brahmacharya is an enormous power. And therefore, it says you should do it. Right. How do you do it? You should do it means how do you do it? For which, again, scriptures, see, whatever I say, you can take it to me. It's all based on authentic, validated literature because it's all documented. Nothing is my own creation. So it says practicing brahmacharya is an eightfold path. It's not easy. It's an eightfold path. It is not just physical, it is mental also. Don't think about the opposite sex. Don't try to interact. Don't try to even gesticulate. Don't attempt to reach. Don't attempt to send signals. And more importantly, don't see the opposite sex. Prakshana, not to look. It may look ridiculous for many in 2020. Fine. This is what Yoga Shastra says. So prakshana, not to see the opposite sex, is one of the essential limbs of brahmacharya. Now, when it comes to forms and names of worship in our Hindu pantheon, this is one religion. That's why we always say Sanatana Dharma and rest of the Abrahamic religions, they are all theologists because they worship a deity or no deity with text, something of that sort. Whereas Sanatana Dharma is always philosophical because there is plurality of deities. So, what do we do in Sanatana Dharma? This is what it says. Every deity has a form, every deity has a dhyana sloka, and every deity has a particular power. You worship Saraswati, she is one who can give you knowledge. Pray to Durga, she will give you courage. Pray to Mahalakshmi, she will give you wealth. Pray to Ganesha, he will take away the hurdles which you may have to confront in doing something. So, each deity and form has a particular power. And it is therefore a requirement that that deity professes, practices that power. The deity is identified with that power. If you go to Saraswati, She should be the Mata of knowledge. So she will manifest everything that is connected to knowledge. She will show that she has that knowledge. She has to exhibit that as knowledge. Only then that power can be pursued as a process of prayer or meditation. So this is our system of worship. And why do we say why should Sanatana Dharma says you should worship form and name? This universe is with multiple forms and names. All of us get distracted every second with various names and forms. Various. So it says this distracted mind should be brought to your focus. How do you bring it to your focus? Bring it to a particular form which is divine in nature, has divine qualities. Now we keep going on, we keep talking. Talking is the food for the thought, for the mind. Thought is the food for the mind, and thoughts emanate as words. So it says, instead of wasting your time in so many talks which are useless, chant divine names. So name and form, which we are regularly doing 24/7. It says do a lateral shifting first into a particular divine form and then chant the name to ensure you attain concentration. And if you want a material prayer, you pray for that material thing, and that energy, that center, that idol, that form has the ability to give you that if you pray sincerely. This is the faith. This is the belief. Therefore, when it comes to Ayyappa, all the four judgments agree to the point Ayyappa is a Naishtika Brahmachari. So he should practice Naishtika Brahmacharyam. As Ganesha can get over hurdles, he should be in a position to grant or convey that Shakti of practicing Brahmacharyam to a sincere devotee whenever he prays, when he reaches that state. For which, see, go to Gita, whatever is the deity you worship, it says, see, there are four ways of liberation. Other than, see, Advaita says you can attain moksha through the Brahman. That's okay. But let us take other forms. There are four ways of reaching a form. How do you pray a form? I love this form. My Kuladevata is this. My Gramatevata is this. My Ishtadevata is, all this is part of our pantheon. By praying to a particular form, what do you get? If you sincerely pray, you can go to the loka where the God resides. Saloka. Then, Samipya, you can be nearer to the God if you are doing it much better. Then Sarupa, you can become the ambassador. You will assume that role and become the ambassador of the deity. And Sayujya, you can merge with the deity. So these are the four possibilities that can happen to you. Therefore, Ayyappa has Naishtika Brahmacharyam as the quality. Now, what has been pursued is saying that, therefore, Ayyappa should not be deviated. That's one way of looking at it. So, therefore, the media is all asking a question, oh, your gods are so weak. No God is weak. No religion is weak. It is actually the other way. It is not that Ayyappa is weak or will get distracted through. No. A person who comes for a worship to get that quality, the deity should first exhibit that quality. So Prakshana, not to look at the opposite sex, is one of the qualities of Brahmacharya, which the deity has to exhibit in that pantheon. It's a requirement under the scriptures. And therefore, there is, because it happens to be a male, see, one thing, let's understand, we're all talking about gender equality. No, Brahmacharyam can be practiced by both. There's enough textual authentication for that. Nobody is barred in practicing it. So here it is a male god. And male god should exhibit the 8 qualities, one of them not looking at. Therefore, they say between 10 and 50, where it is possible for a tendency to procreate, is therefore not allowed in this temple. It's a temple practice. Now tell me what is wrong about it. Is it wrong to have such a practice? Who is treating whom as a slave? Who is ill-treating whom? Who is denigrating whom? What are we doing? No. This is the requirement of the deity. And therefore, that is followed as a temple practice. So this is one attitude, one aspect of it. Now the second aspect is something which is connected to a woman. But it is actually, if you look at the larger picture, it is one of the practices of purity and cleanliness. When I said yama, which are restraints, I cataloged 5 restraints. Yoga Sutra says yama, niyama, observances. One of the most important observances is purity and cleanliness. It is part of any religious text. You need to be pure physically, and you will slowly become pure mentally. What do you mean by purity of mind? Getting over anger, getting over greed, getting over jealousy. Everything is possible through practice. It is possible, provided you go through that process. Likewise, physical cleanliness and physical purity is one of the elementary requirements for any religion. And Sanatana Dharma puts it as an essential practice. So, purity and cleanliness is a large canvas. It does not see caste. It does not see status. It does not see power. It does not see affluence. You can't say, no scripture will say, if you are affluent, you need not be pure. It won't say. If you want, you may be anything in this world. If you want to go through the process, you have to be pure. And this purity, which we call it as defilement or pollution, is common to both the genders. For example, somebody dies in the family. It applies to both. For example, in Guru Ayurappan temple, when a child of say 6 months old, you take it for Annaprashana, and it suddenly urinates, they will immediately do Shuddhi Punyavajanam inside the temple premises. Immediately they will do it. And there is no gender bias there. Girl or boy, they will do it. So this purity is common to, there are some pollution or defilement which is common to both the genders. Menstruation happens to be one aligned only with a woman. That's all. Amongst the several sets of pollution practices, this is one which is identified to a particular gender. And you will be, it's such an interesting, we did 3 months research on this and collected, gathered materials to say, we are all, I showed it to my own juniors who are girls. They were all shocked to see we have no idea, none of us know anything about what you are producing to us. That's the kind of lack of information, that's the kind of misinformation we have about all these things. Any assumption that this is a caste practice by somebody is first wrong. This practice is there even amongst the tribals. So it is not a caste specific practice. So you cannot shun it on that ground. 2, it is not a religion specific practice. Justice Nariman in his judgment has explained it beautifully, recorded pages after pages, evidence from every religion, and concludes a finding, it's an essential practice because every religion believes in it. So it is not religion specific. More importantly, it is not civilization specific. More importantly, see, we are known, whenever we talk of civilization, we normally classify into 4. The Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and then comes the Indus Valley civilization. Every civilization has practiced menstruation. Every civilization, without exception. And what is the practice? Every civilization identifies it with a female god. See, just because it's a short talk, I'll just put only brief. As I said, I'll state only facts, not arguments. I want to just place only facts because that's the contour we are entitled to travel up to this. Therefore, we should travel only that far. Now, this is considered paramount. Why should it be a civilizational practice? See, today you may call it a ridiculous practice. It's your choice. If you feel you're outgrown all this, very well, take it so. But religion doesn't want to take it so. Religion says this is important. You respect or disrespect, your choice. That is individual. Religion says, every religion, every civilization says why it is important. There are three basic reasons. One is religious in nature, in terms of purity and cleanliness. Every religion, every civilization says you cannot pray during this period. It is to be avoided. All the religions and all the Greek, Roman, everyone has a deity. It's all there, authenticated in books. So, one is religious in nature. Two is philosophical in nature. Our Upanishads there is a reference to menstruation in Upanishads. Can you believe? It says, when we say prana, which is the life breath, all of us live because we breathe. This prana has 5 types of prana within the body. Prana, apana, vyana, udana, and samana. Each one performs a particular duty. One helps digestion. One helps inhalation. One helps exhalation. One helps blood circulation. Out of that 5, 4 of the pranas move from the bottom to the top. The movement is upward. Whereas in the case of apana, the movement is downward. That's the only prana which pushes down. That's why yoga says it reverses the process and you become a yogi. Now, what does it push down? It's going against the gravity. What is it is pushing down? Apana does 5. Defecation, urination, ejaculation, mother-child delivery, and menstruation. These are the 5 properties of apana. Pushing it down. And this is one prana. See, all of us would have vaguely read somewhere. Our mind is made up of 3 gunas. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva is pure, Rajas is aggressive, Tamas is dull. This apana works on Rajas, aggression, because it has to put pressure down for defecation, urination, ejaculation. Everything is something which moves out, sending things out of our body, delivering a child, and menstrual blood. So, this 5 which goes out is handled by apana, which is Rajasic in nature. In your Rajasic mind, your mind will not be steady. Your mind will not be calm. Have you not seen our sisters? Have you not seen our daughters suffering so much out of this? Every monthly cycle. All of us would have seen it. So, it's a tough period for any woman. And therefore they say, that's why in Sanskrit it's called as Rajaswala, Rajas, aggression. Therefore they say, you should not pray during this period. And they say, if you remain calm and quiet during this period, it turns out to be a practice of a vrata. It gains energy. You don't have to do anything else, rest. By resting, your energy increases. And therefore, it is called a vrata. Now, there is a third angle, which is Ayurvedic, medicinal. See, the foundation of the universe is always associated with women. Maya is always attributed as a Shakti Rupa. What is Maya? Maya is the potentate of the power called Brahman, God, whatever you may call. And which has the creating power. So that is why it is seated in a woman. The power of creation, procreation, and generations to go is seated in a woman as a representative of Maya. That's why Hindu Dharma eulogizes and offers so much respect to womanhood. Is there any other religion which offers prayers to a woman? As a child, when she is 5 years old or 8 years old, we offer her Kanya Puja. When she is married, we offer her puja as Suhasini. When she becomes a mother, she becomes half God. So everything connected to a woman is always considered very worshipful in our. See, people don't practice, people do ill-treat is not a mistake of the religion. When somebody hits his wife, that fellow should be finished. Put 10 guys in place. Things will change. But you can't say, connect it with religion. Religion doesn't say so. The two great epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, conveys one truth. If you play with woman, you will get distracted. That's the message of both these epics. That's the power, that's the respect we offer to women in our system. So Ayurveda says, you have to be very careful. See, women, menstruation, and procreation are directly connected to moon cycles. There are very, very interesting and important chapters in Ayurveda on this. See, there are two cycles, the waxing moon and the waning moon. Why one should seek a procreation during waxing moon? Why one should avoid waning moon? Out of the 30-day cycle, the prescription is you should attempt a procreation only for 6 days. It's all found out. It's all identified. These are the 6 auspicious days for you to get a good progeny. If you do it and get conceived, if the woman conceives it on a waning moon, on a different, it says on the 15th day, if it is conceived, the child will be like this. On the 8th day, the child will be like this. These are all the attitude which the child will get. It's all prescribed. Authentic. Ayurveda is Padaveda, Upaveda. So, it all says so. Therefore, because it is connected to her health as Rajaswala and her child's health, they impart extraordinary care. It is not a period to be ill-treated, nor is it a stigma. Draupadi, when she was pulled to the court, there's a court in Mahabharata. He said, I demand you don't touch me. I demand, I have a right to say, because I'm in my cycles. So it is something to do with honor. It is something to do with assertion. Says the religion. You may believe, you may not believe. That doesn't matter. So, seeds from Ayurveda, from Upanishad, and this is how we can show from every religion and every civilization. Now tell me, is this not an essential practice? So you have two basic buckets in which you have few other subsidiary issues also. I don't want to be, it's a narration of fact. It's okay. We'll broadly reach the contours. So these are the two broad features duly validated, saying that this is how it goes. So 7 judges have said if something is essential, if you show it from the text, then the inquiry should end. No further inquiry. If you show these texts and say that the idol should practice, rather than saying the idol will get deviated, the idol should represent that feature in it, and therefore it is to be avoided. And in the menstruation, now somebody has also written a book, radiation. So when a tapasvi, when brahmacharyam gets more and more stored in your body, you will generate so much of heat. You will radiate, says scriptures. That radiation should not affect the uterus. That's the reason. So, well, these are the facts. We can't say this is right, that is right, this is judgment. Please do not ask questions about judgment. These are facts which needs to be, and much more, many people will say a lot. So this has to be, but broadly, does it not satisfy the essential practice test? That's the point. Now, see what is happening currently. If you take the judgment, interestingly, the minority judge, the Honorable Justice Indu Malhotra, concludes it's an essential practice. And Justice Nariman concludes it's an essential practice. To that extent, there is an agreement. The only legal aspect which we find in his judgment is, he frames a question whether social reformation can be done through a reform by the legislature through legislation reforming a religious practice, because he has already concluded is essential. And he records the fact that Saifuddin is pending before a larger bench. Justice Rajagopal Iyengar has said this illuminating paragraph. So I will not decide this question. And the legislation which was before the court was not a social reformation legislation. It was a regulatory legislation. It only regulated and restricted. It was not a reformation. However, after saying that, I will leave the question open, the learned judge strikes down the law as bad. Therefore, to that extent, if the judgment is suppose persuaded to be modified, then the judgment of Nariman is in sync with judgment of Justice Indu Malhotra, as it satisfies essential practices. Now come to the other two, by the then Chief Justice, Honorable Justice Deepak Mishra and Justice Kanvilkar, both wrote out that a common judgment. The only point on which they allowed the case was, Supreme Court has said superstitious beliefs can be inquired and thrown out of the practice. With utmost respect, I think a different view is certainly possible. In the very same judgment which they are relaying, in the very same paragraph, it was on facts, it was a case deciding a secular practice and not a religious practice. And there is, the next sentence itself says, superstitions which are unessential. See, it is not that Supreme Court has said anywhere, something is essential, we agree. But out of that essential, something is superstitious. Then once it is superstitious, essential superstitious, unessential superstitious, no such classification. If something is found to be superstitious, if it is part of see, many people can say menstruation is superstitious very easily, in spite of all this text. So it's only our judgment, which, see, very importantly, Justice Malhotra brings all the judgments from all the courts, starting from America to Australia, end to end, all continents. All of them think alike. Don't interpret religious text. Please keep away. See, when Europe fought to divide between church and state, which they divided, now the reverse should not happen. The state should not interfere into church, either through its own branch or through some other or a constitutional organ. That's precisely the question. So there is a clear clarity even in so if we can persuade, and if it is possible, this is one view. And suppose for any reason, quote, this is acceptable, only that portion of the that judgment authored by two learned judges has to be handled. Suppose these two are persuaded. This is at this point of time only a viewpoint. Then what looked as 4:1 against the tradition will actually become 4:1 in favor of the tradition. It's possible. And we are now left with only one lead judgment. That's again a single, judgment authored by one of the judges in a very detailed way. Now, these are the governing principles, which I thought I'll just put it across in say 10 minutes. If you see our part 3, except articles governing religion, rest of the articles are subject to rationality test. It should be rational, reasonable. Whereas articles connected to religion is not amenable to rationality test. It is a constitutional guarantee that it is outside the ambit of rationality test. Now, how can you judo position these articles then? First question. When one belongs to a different group and the rest belongs to a different group, how can you overarch when there is a perfect mismatch even at the conceptual stage? It's one issue which can it be done? That's one issue which we need to certainly ponder upon. Now, 2, see, the path that is sought to be pursued is possibly Article 25 uses the expression subject to other articles, which is read as subordinate to. It is being interpreted as subordinate to. Interestingly, if you see, the word religion appears in other articles also, say in 60, in 19, in 26, in 29, in 30. So, contextually, subject to can only mean wherever religion, because one is rational, another is irrational. Where science stops, religion begins. Where reason stops, faith begins, religion begins there. That's the understanding all over the world. You can't scientifically understand religion. It's not permissible. So, it's not required. I wouldn't say permissible, it's not required. Now, therefore, the subject to is an expression which has to be read subject to its reference to religion and religious aspect in other articles. And interestingly, you will not find a mention of the word religion either in 14 or in 21. Both of them don't refer to the word expression religion anywhere. Rightly so. And even in 19, qua 25, subject matters with reference to 25, not outside 25. It's not breeding a new thought process. Therefore, subject to is not subordinate to, is one possible view which we can persuade at this point of time. Now, 3, more important, because ultimately it is made out as a gender discriminatory test. The judgment only seeks to say, this is slavery, this is removing the shackles, this is deep-rooted. It uses various expressions to say that women have been suppressed, oppressed, and demonized through this, which is something, a natural instinct to a woman. Now, and therefore, the whole exercise is arbitrary. See, Article 14, standard test is equals should not be treated equally, and unequal should not be treated equally. Equals should not be treated unequally, unequal should not be treated equally. That's the standard formula. The discrimination is not on gender. The restriction is based on religious practices called purity and cleanliness. Because women less than 10 and women above 50 can still go to Sabarimala. So, as we are now seeing some debates going on, one of the debates which is also pending before the court. No, this A is taken out of the basket. B, C, and D are permitted. At a peripheral level, yes, one is out and the rest of the three are there. But if you inquire, it is not at A and B. It is at what is happening to A, B, C, and D. And you are entitled to inquire that under law. What is happening to B, C, and D is not happening to A. Similarly, the classification is not male versus female. The classification is cleanliness and purity. Versus, and that is not for the gender. For male, you don't have that. But male has a different thing. For example, somebody is on a penance, vrata for Ayyappa, his father dies. He will not go. It applies also, because pollution at a larger framework applies also to male. The types of pollution may vary. I agree. But pollution, it is not that they have chosen pollution practices only and dumped it against women. No. It applies to both sexes. So this is something which needs to be brought to the notice of the court when it comes to Article 14. Then constitutional morality. See, are we saying, see whether preamble can be here, all that, let me not be examining it. In fact, it was a big learning for me listening to our senior CSV sir's discussion and the way he articulated the subject matter with such a beauty. It's a big learning, and therefore he has already covered it very extensively. I'll have to say only one thing here. Are we saying, no, we have to take a call at some point of time. Are we saying there must be a constitutional religion? So what does constitutional morality mean? Now the judgment says very clearly, that one judgment very clearly says, even if it is a religious practice, constitutional values will overarch it. And suggest that at a later point of time, essential practice test, whether at all we should have essential practice test, should be examined. It has already substituted the test in this judgment. So the point we need to deliberate upon is, right, so are we saying henceforth for all religions, it will not be the religious text, it will be the constitutional text because of constitutional morality which will guide religion. You have to follow some text to practice. So, is it that religious text should give way and constitutional text will substitute religious texts? Because that is the morality. In which case, are we not rationalizing religion under the constitutional process, through the constitutional process? A legislation can rationalize it on the ground of social reform if it can. It has not done it, it will not be able to do it because it is only in one single temple this is happening. Rare. It's not that all women are barred from entry into temples to make it into a constitutional crisis. So, when social reformation is not possible, or it has not happened at least as on date through a legislative mechanism, can now we say we will substitute constitutional text of religion? So are we to move next? Hereafter, it will be a constitutional morality. All India will practice the following 10 qualities as religion for all religions. Rest has to be considered to be archaic and not serve the purpose to move ahead in the constitutional doctrine. Are we to emulate such a model when rest of the world has not done it? Everybody is staying away from religion. And if you do it, does it not interfere with the basic structure of the Constitution. And secondly, will we not be rewriting Article 25 in that case when we reach there to say, notwithstanding anything contained in any religion, religion shall be. See, it uses certain phrases saying religious morality versus fundamental morality versus prevailing morality. This is a very important topic, which we can lecture for 3 hours. Religion and religious morality will always remain static. Dharma will always be dharma, adharma will always be adharma. You can't swap them. You may believe, you may not believe. That choice is always with you. But prevailing and functional period will change. But are we to say, because times are changing, religious morality should also keep changing? When one of the retired judges came and met our spiritual guru, he asked this question to him. There are so many practices in Vedas which are very difficult for us at this age and stage. Can't you not relax it for us? After all, you're a guru. If you say, everybody will agree. Then he posed a counter question to him. All right, you are a judge till few months back. You find somebody has committed a crime. And you find committing crime is now the order of the day. Therefore, let us also dilute the law because it should match with him. Will you do it as a judge? Judge said, no, I won't do it. Then why are you asking me to do that? Prevailing morality and fundamental morality, as one who perceives, can be anything. It will change from time to time. Agreeable. We don't disagree with them. But that can overarch religious morality is, are we not transplanting our own views of religion into texts? Individual liberty versus institutional liberties. That's one theory again. Yeah. See, fortunately, all various judgments in the last 3 years, individual liberty qua family, individual liberty qua marriage, individual liberty qua society, and individual, Sabarimala is one, individual liberty qua religion. So what is the dominant objective of our constitution? Now, fortunately, in spite of all these lead judgments which are authored in this. Now, 4:1 in Aadhaar, when it comes to other than religion, whether it is marriage or any institution for that matter, because these institutions also have some nexus to our Sanatana Dharma and its practices. Aadhaar finally has resolved it, fortunately. Whatever may be the views in various judgments, Aadhaar says 4:1. Whenever there is a flashpoint in making a call, taking a call between individual liberty and communitarian values, our court is inclined only to say communitarian values will prevail over individual liberties. That's a 4:1 judgment. So that takes care of institutional liberties other than religion. The question is there something like that for religion too? That is. In spite of all these discussions, in spite of all these observations and views expressed, as we have communitarian value should overarch in Aadhaar, we now have a unanimous constitutional bench judgment of the Supreme Court delivered later in time, the Ayodhya case, And in 4 sentences, the learned judges have put it in a masterly language and with absolutely no ambiguity. Just 3 or 4 sentences. Now, I'll just read only those 3 sentences. I thought that's the only text I should read clearly because we should not miss it out. I'm reading the text, which is this original reportable from the site, picked it up, para 77. It says, our court is founded on and owes its existence to a constitutional order. We must firmly reject any attempt to lead the court to interpret religious doctrine in an absolute and extreme form and question the faith of worshippers. Nothing would be as destructive of the values underlying Article 25 of the Constitution. Therefore, 5 judges in an unanimous decision have held, reiterating the essential practice test, saying that whatever the worshipper feels that it is his faith. Of course, it should have a nexus to a document or a doctrine or a practice. He can't do whatever I feel is no, that's not. So worshippers' faith. When none of the worshippers have come to the court to say, no, this practice is to be discontinued, are we to now weigh a constitutional interpretation in abstract or a faithful worshipper's view to be recognized as a constitutional guarantee? Will be one more interesting question. So there are 3-4 ways which in this, say, 1 hour and 10 minutes, 70 minutes, as a matter of narration, we have tried to discuss this. I'm once again very thankful to learned judges, senior counsels, our colleagues, judges from the judiciary, and friends, well-wishers. It's a very interesting journey. We spent almost 4-5 months, and whatever we say, I can assure you, it's all properly authenticated. I say this with a sense of responsibility. In public domain, it's my commitment that we will speak only truth and nothing but truth. Not that we speak something else in court. No, it's very important because people believe us, our words. Therefore, whatever we say, we should stand by it. And whatever has been said in the 70 minutes, it's all has a basis. I'm grateful to Shini, my classmate. We were all together in the law college. Hema and honorable judges, everybody. I want to convey this to our women and also men, young women especially. See, we are undergoing a churn where there are 2 ways of looking at your rights and your positioning. The Western thought is always that they first say what you're doing as your profile in life, as a mother, as getting a children, as a wife. This is because it doesn't give you economic benefits. They say that this is not, it is a job of a maid. First assertion. 2, therefore, pitched against men. Second stage. 3, therefore, a fight for equality. And 4, therefore, a need for a liberation. Now, I'm making this only for people who believe in our scriptures. I'm not making it as a sermon and say this is what, no, these are all viewpoints. For people who believe in our texts do not treat women this way. See, any day, women are more organized than men. Take any field. If you can rear and bring up a child, it has management techniques. It has psychiatric techniques. It has huge sensitive connect tissue techniques, upbringing a family, upbringing a child. If a woman can do that, what is that she cannot do in this world? Is what our religion progresses. So my only request is, two things you bear it in mind, especially youngsters who believe in our scriptures. You always find whatever your ambitions, your desires, you should fulfill it. You should achieve it in your life. But ensure when you seek progress to achieve that, the basic commitments which as nature has crafted for you are somehow not left out. See your circumstances, see the support, see who can help you to ensure that the goal is reached. Please arrange all these affairs carefully. Don't either relegate it or dismiss it or put it in the back burner and think only of your aspirations. You have an aspiration, you should achieve it. But ensure everything which supports that without a disturbance to the ecosystem, please try to do it so that the benefit which you and I got through our mothers, we should pass on that baton generation after generation. It's a humble request I make it to you. Regarding young women, see, unless you respect women, life can anytime be showing you the door. What happened in Mahabharata? One instance, one woman was dishonored by playing dice, Shakuni. By one Duryodhana who said, bring her here. By one Duchadana who disrobed her, dishonored her. One Bhishma Pitamahar who said, I am a servant to the kingdom, I cannot go beyond what the king says. So I have to keep quiet here. Drona, who's a teacher to all these people, after knowing it is wrong, keeps quiet because he has taken the food from the kingdom. All of them perished because they misbehaved. When I say misbehaved, some misbehaved, some did not act at all. Never demean a woman in your life. Never do it. Nature is not going to help you. And the request for women, don't leave your natural gifted womanly qualities and try to acquire manly qualities. You are more potential and more progressive and more efficient than any man. If these two principles, if you bear it in mind, go out to the world, go and achieve whatever you want to achieve. Nature will be with you and support you till the last. Namaste once again for giving me this valuable opportunity.